"Hi, I'm Vianney." My sister stood in front of the entire boardroom, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You're nothing but a glorified doorman." Then she fired me, just like that. No warning, no shame. My father? He just sat there, silent. They all watched me leave, with my nameplate still warm in my hands. But I left them something they didn't notice, until the headlines hit. Before we begin, where are you listening from and what time is it for you? Tell me. Have you ever had to stay quiet? Just long enough for the truth to roar? I always arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was eager, God knows I wasn't anymore, but because it gave me time to breathe before the charade began. The conference room on the 18th floor was all glass. Walls, table, even the door handle. It looked sleek, modern, expensive, but it never felt warm. And today, with the gray Boston sky pressing in from all angles, it felt like a tomb. I stepped in quietly, heels soft against the slate floor, my blazer smoothed, papers tucked under one arm. No one looked up. Seraphine sat at the head of the table in our late father's chair like she'd been born into it. She hadn't. I had. She just clawed her way to it the moment his ashes cooled. Now her fingers rested lightly on the polished glass surface, perfectly manicured, perfectly poised, as if she hadn't just shoved me to the margins of the company I helped keep afloat for over a decade. I took my seat 2 chairs down. Donna from HR gave me a quick, nervous nod. Doug, the CFO, avoided eye contact entirely. I scanned the room. 12 people, some family, most not, all pretending they didn't know what was coming. "All right," Seraphine said, voice sharp as winter wind. "Let's begin." As usual, I opened the review, outlining key operations metrics, distribution timelines, regional losses, a pilot logistics platform I had been developing for months. I knew the numbers cold. They were mine. I'd worked on them until midnight every night the last 3 weeks, while Seraphine was off sipping cocktails in Miami for strategic visioning. But the moment I started to discuss the software's test phase, she cut in, loud, flat. "Vianney," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, "let's not bore everyone with your spreadsheets. You always did get too lost in the weeds." There was a pause. I looked at her, unsure if I'd heard right. Excuse me?" She leaned back in the chair, crossed her legs like we were at brunch. I said, "Let's keep it high level. Or better yet, let's save you the trouble." She turned to the room, her tone suddenly sweet. "Team, I've made a leadership decision. As of today, Vianney is no longer with the company." Silence. Not a stunned gasp. Not a single, "Wait, what?" Just silence. The kind that sucks the oxygen out of a room and dares you to breathe wrong. "I beg your pardon?" I asked quietly. Seraphine's smirk widened. "Don't make it dramatic. It's been coming for a while. You've been more of a symbolic figurehead, really." Her eyes scanned the table for approval. "You know, like a glorified doorman, always opening doors, never really running the place." A couple of chuckles, small, embarrassed, desperate, spilled from 2 junior VPs who'd been hired last year. I think one of them even mouthed, "Sorry," without looking at me. I sat still, very still. My hands were steady, but my spine felt hollow. Not broken, just cleanly scooped out. She didn't even have the decency to meet me halfway in private. She wanted an audience. She wanted a crown, and she had it. Without a word, I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy gold nameplate I always kept in my briefcase, Vianney Elira, VP of Operations. It was a gift from our father the year I saved the company during the supply chain collapse. I laid it gently in the center of the table. The click of it meeting glass was the loudest sound in the room. No one moved. No one said a word. Not even Donna. I stood, adjusted my collar, and walked out. Past the receptionist who refused to meet my eyes. Past the portraits in the hallway, our grandfather, our father, and now, I suppose, Seraphine. When I reached the elevator, the doors slid open. Inside stood Donna, the janitor. her mop in hand, her eyes watching me quietly. "You don't belong with them," she said, almost in a whisper. I nodded, lips pressed together, and stepped into the elevator. 20 minutes later, I was weaving through the gray sprawl of Boston, the city cold and wet with that coastal dampness that seeps into your bones. The windshield wipers beat a slow rhythm as I made my way to the other side of town. This company was never hers. It was built in silence. My silence. I remembered the nights I slept in the office, the holiday weekends I skipped, the board meetings where I kept my mouth shut while my ideas were claimed by someone else with a louder voice and a bolder tie. But I had always known this day would come. Our father built a kingdom but forgot to build a will. He trusted blood to sort things out, but blood clots, blood thickens, and blood forgets. When I pulled up to the storage facility, the sky had already begun to darken, and the streetlights flickered with that buzzing orange glow. The keypad beeped as I entered the code. Inside the unit, stacked carefully along one wall, were boxes, and inside those boxes, ledgers, contracts, voicemails burned to disk, a few items tucked into folders I had marked with color-coded tabs over the last 7 years, but most importantly, framed under glass, rested a document I had once pretended to forget existed. It wasn't revenge, it was insurance, and the time to cash it in had just begun. By the time I closed the latch on the storage unit, dusk had swallowed the skyline. The cold had crept into my sleeves, but my fingers still clutched the keys like they meant something. I didn't look back at the shelves, not yet, not until I was ready to let them speak for me. I slid into my car, turned the ignition, and just sat there. My phone lay on the passenger seat. No calls, no texts, no blinking light. I didn't expect anything, but still, the silence pressed in like an old bruise someone kept poking. A few blocks away, I pulled into the lot of an all-night diner off Commonwealth. It was the kind of place where people didn't ask questions, just poured coffee and let you be. I slid into a booth by the window, my coat still buttoned, scarf half on. The warmth felt foreign. Outside, traffic passed without pause. Taillights smeared red across the wet pavement. The city didn't care what happened behind boardroom doors. Boston moved on, just like Seraphine had. A waitress in her 60s with tired eyes and a messy bun placed a mug on my table without a word. I murmured thanks, even though I wasn't sure I'd drink it. I unfolded the paper napkin, folded it again. My name was probably already scrubbed from the company website. The email server would bounce me back. My access badge deactivated. Just like that, years gone. Still, I wouldn't cry. Not here, not where strangers could see. I left a few bills under the mug and stepped back out into the wind. The air had shifted, damp and heavier than before. I drove slowly, not wanting to arrive, but knowing I would. At the edge of the city, tucked behind an auto shop and a closed-down laundromat, the storage facility loomed quiet under a single flickering lamp. I parked and keyed in the code. The metal door rolled up, groaning like it was waking from sleep. Inside, the air smelled of cardboard and time. I flicked the light on. 5 boxes lined the back wall, each labeled with thick black marker, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. I went straight to the one marked 2020. It had started there after Dad's second stroke. The board had gotten nervous. Seraphine had grown bolder. Inside the box, a zip-top bag with a USB drive, a bound memo with his signature, dated, notarized, and a photo. Dad standing next to me, hand on my shoulder. It wasn't formal. It was real. Taken in the warehouse when I led the redesign. I laid the items on the makeshift work table by the wall. My breath clouded in the cold. I didn't open the files. Not yet. I needed to remember what this was really about. Not revenge, not even redemption. It was about truth and silence. The kind that makes people believe you have nothing to say, was no longer serving me. I shut the box gently, relocked the unit, and turned to leave. As I stepped through the gate toward the parking lot, a figure shifted near the vending machines. I paused. A man stood there, late 50s maybe, with thick salt and pepper hair under a faded Red Sox cap. He wore a dark blue maintenance jacket, collar up against the wind. He looked familiar, but it took a beat before I placed him. The elevator operator? From HQ, the one who stood behind the controls that morning as Seraphine stripped me down in front of everyone with a smile on her face. He'd seen it. All of it. I didn't expect anything from him, but he nodded at me. Just once, and said in a voice rough from years of dust and cold nights, "You were better than all of them." I blinked. He didn't wait for a response, just reached into his pocket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper, and held it out. "In case you ever decide to stop playing nice," he added. "You didn't hear it from me." I took it slowly, feeling the weight of something I couldn't name. He turned, walked toward the alley, and disappeared before I could say a word. I stood alone, the paper warm from his hand. I hesitated, then unfolded it. A name. A date. I didn't recognize either, but something in my gut shifted. I slipped the paper into my coat pocket and looked up at the night sky. For the first time all day, I felt something close to steady. The storm had begun, but it wasn't mine alone anymore. The paper crinkled slightly in my hand as I stepped off the curb and wandered toward the Charles River. The streetlights cast pale halos onto the damp pavement. I found myself standing by the railing where joggers usually pause to stretch. Tonight it was just me and the quiet hum of the city. Richard Elira. The name barely escaped my lips. I hadn't said it aloud in years. 7 to be exact. 7 years since I last saw him on that cold February morning, both of us younger, unscarred, and still pretending our ambition wouldn't rip us apart. He'd looked me in the eyes and said words that haunted me long after. "It's either your family or your future." I'd chosen my family. I'd chosen wrong. A bitter wind rushed off the river and hit my cheek. I turned away from the water, slipped the note into my pocket, and walked slowly back toward my car, the echo of his name still pulsing in my chest like an old wound reopened. Back in my apartment, I didn't bother turning on the main lights, just the small lamp by the sofa. Its amber glow softened the edges of everything, including my thoughts. I curled up with a blanket, but the quiet did nothing to still my mind. Richard. Back then, he and I were something strange, brilliant, chaotic, magnetic. We were still in grad school when we met, hustling through internships and coffee-fueled pitch nights, dreaming of building something that would matter. I trusted him the way young women too often trust clever men who say, "You're the smartest person I know." We mapped out early concepts for what eventually became Arcline, on legal pads, index cards, even napkins. I remember one night in particular, 2 a.m. in a diner near South Station. I'd just finished outlining a decentralized procurement model, and he grinned like I'd told him a secret no one else in the world knew. He leaned across the table and whispered, "This is going to change everything, Vi. Promise me you won't ever forget this moment." I promised. And then he disappeared. No fight, no breakup, just vanished. 1 week he was building my dream with me, and the next he was gone. I told myself he got scared, that he wasn't ready, that he loved me but not enough to stay. Now, I wasn't so sure. After midnight, I opened the storage box again, the one labeled 2020. Inside was an old USB stick, one of those chunky ones we used before everything went cloud-based. I walked over to the closet and pulled out an ancient Dell laptop, still coated in a fine layer of dust. I plugged the USB in and powered it on. The fan roared to life like it was waking from a coma. A few slow minutes passed. Then the screen flickered. One folder popped up. Arcline internal, backup. Inside were backups of everything I'd once feared losing. Slide decks, private notes, memos never sent, and then an email thread I didn't recognize. From richiconcilio.dev. Subject, RE, final terms. She'll never know. Date, 2 weeks before the board vote. I double-clicked. There were 5 messages, short, coded, confident. The majority stake is secured. Contract language finalized. Legal reviewed. Flawless. Just make sure she doesn't see until the vote. She trusts Seraphine. That's the only leverage we need. Keep it clean. No digital trail. Ironic, right? She taught me to draft like this. My throat went dry. I wasn't just betrayed. I'd been used. Twice. The same man who once kissed my forehead and called me his future co-founder had not only stolen the architecture of my company, but helped my sister weaponize it. I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I opened a new folder, labeled it Evidence RR. I copied every email, every time-stamped memo, every slide with embedded metadata that traced back to our early years. Then I attached it all to a fresh USB. One step at a time, VNA. I stood, went to the kitchen, poured water into a chipped glass, and drank slowly, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I walked back to the living room and opened an encrypted email client, one I hadn't used since my contract negotiations with international partners. I stared at the screen, trying to think of the right subject line. Then I typed, Subject, Whistleblower Submission, Urgent. But I didn't send it yet. Instead, I hovered over the To field. I didn't type Seraphine's name. I didn't type Richard's either. No, there was someone else. A name I hadn't said out loud since my father's funeral. Someone who used to say, if it ever goes too far, come to me. I won't ask questions. I whispered, You played me twice, Richard. Then I typed the name and hit send. The subject line read, Whistleblower Submission, Urgent. I hit send. For a long moment I just sat there, the only sound in my apartment the faint hum of the fridge. My eyes drifted to the window. It had started to drizzle. Boston rain. Thin and cold, like it had something personal against you. Then the reply came. Ping. From an address I hadn't seen in years, relyraveltegroup.com. No hello, no explanation. Just, you always did dig deep. Meet me where we buried the first pitch, 4 p.m. No signature. But I didn't need one. I stood in front of the library's lion statues at 3:57, breath visible in the late afternoon chill, rain lightly tapping the top of my umbrella. It wasn't just any library. This courtyard had once been our canvas. When we were kids, ambitious, stubborn, and broke, Richard and I would come here after hours. We'd sneak cappuccinos from the cafe next door, tuck ourselves under the covered arches, and scribble ideas like they were sacred spells. I used to believe in those nights. I used to believe in him. And now? Now I was walking into a place where my future had been drawn and betrayed. I took the long path around the courtyard, slow on purpose. Each step, a memory. That bench where I first described the AI prototype. That planter box where he kissed me after I landed our first angel investor. I could almost smell the ink of those old blueprints, folded into that weathered paperback copy of The Fountainhead. He had carried it everywhere. Said he liked the arrogance of it. At 4:06 I heard his voice before I saw him. Still early. Some things never change. He came in from the Dartmouth Street entrance, not a single raindrop on his suit, charcoal gray, tailored, expensive. He looked like someone who'd left the struggle long behind. And he had. I thought you said 4, I replied. He glanced at his watch and smirked. I did. I also said it wasn't personal. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I said, You really expect me to believe this was just business? That you just stumbled into my sister's scheme? Richard stepped closer, hands tucked in his coat pockets like we were old friends catching up. She offered me something you never did, Vianney, he said evenly. Access. I tilted my head. Access to what? My ideas? My name? No, access to a legacy, one that didn't revolve around control. I stiffened. You mean one that didn't revolve around me? His gaze didn't flinch. You always wanted to lead everything. Every conversation, every meeting, every dream. Seraphine just wanted to build. My fingers dug into the strap of my handbag. She wanted to steal. And you helped her. He shrugged. She knew what she wanted. You always underestimated her. I took a step back, suddenly needing space. The rain was picking up. Then he said it, like it was nothing. She's not just your sister anymore, she's my future wife." It didn't feel like a slap. It felt like watching someone take a knife to the blueprint of your past and smile while doing it. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I studied him, his perfectly pressed shirt, his empty expression, and I saw it for what it was. He hadn't disappeared because he was scared. He had been rerouting, repositioning, aligning himself with someone who had what I once gave him: trust. "You two deserve each other," I said, quieter than I meant. He didn't respond. For a moment, neither of us moved, just two people standing in the ruins of something they built together, pretending it never mattered. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small white envelope. It was sealed with a simple sticker, plain, like a wedding invitation. "This is for your registry," I said, handing it to him. Richard took it with a raised eyebrow. "You didn't strike me as the sentimental type." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "It's just a few things I thought you'd find useful." Then I turned and walked away. Not quickly, not dramatically, just done. I didn't look back. Not when I heard the soft tear of the envelope opening. Not when I imagined his fingers flipping through the list of NDA violations and whistleblower code references. I just kept walking toward the street, letting the drizzle wash the weight off my shoulders. Behind me, something fell. I didn't need to turn around to know what it was. I didn't look back. Not even when I heard the soft thud behind me, the sound of the envelope slipping from Richard's hand. Instead, I kept walking through the narrow side exit of the library, my coat already damp from the drizzle that had turned into a steady, whispering rain. Boston was always like this in early November, gray, cold, expectant, a city on the edge of winter. And me? I was done waiting. The train ride back to Somerville was quiet. I chose the last car. No one sat near me, and I didn't mind. The image of Richard's face, his confusion, that flicker of dread when he read what I gave him, kept looping in my mind like an old film reel. But I didn't replay it for satisfaction. I replayed it because of something he'd said earlier. She gave me access. That word had burrowed under my skin all the way home. Access, not love, not trust, just leverage. By the time I reached the shared workspace on Bow Street, it was past 9. The place was nearly empty except for one man near the printer, headphones on, head bobbing to some lo-fi beat. I nodded politely and slipped into the corner desk I'd claimed over the past few weeks. No nameplate, no title. Just a second-hand laptop, a chipped coffee mug, and my earbuds. I plugged in and logged into the federal IP database. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The one thing I still trusted. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment. Then I typed, USPTO, Elswick 5. Nothing came up. No surprise there. Seraphine had been thorough on the surface, so I tried again. Elswick V&A. Patent filings. Then I found it. Buried deeper than expected, but still there. Patent ID? 238-4157R. Title: Predictive AI Integration for Preclinical Pathways. Applicant: Vianette E. Elswick. Status: active. Reassignment: none. My heart didn't race. I didn't gasp or freeze. I just sat back in the creaky chair, the cursor blinking in the corner of the screen like a metronome. Still mine. All these years, Seraphine had bragged that she re-engineered the firm's foundation, that she improved what never worked. But in the system that mattered, the legal one, nothing had changed. I opened the associated PDF. Page 1 had my original code structure, page 2 had my schematic, and page 3, a clause marked Rights Retained. That was all I needed. I downloaded the file and renamed it simply Rights Retained PDF. No timestamp, no initials, just the truth. And then, I didn't send it to Seraphine. Instead, I pulled up a fresh email window and typed 2 addresses, e.laflinaNovogenboard.com, r.hayes@McAllen Partners.com. The first was the board chairman. The second, McAllen Partners, the hedge fund that held a controlling interest in Seraphine's latest acquisition. I didn't write a message, no subject line, no sign-off, Just the document. Click. Sent. Then I sat there for a few minutes, listening, breathing. The guy at the printer had left. It was just me and the humming of servers. By midnight, the rain had turned into something thicker, more insistent. I packed my things and pulled my hood up, but I didn't go home. Instead, I took a long walk toward the place I once thought I'd never return to. The corporate headquarters sat on a quiet street just off Mass Ave. The building was modern now, glass facade, LED signage, but I still remembered when it had been just a refurbished dental office with a handwritten plaque and a shared coffee machine. I didn't need a key to get in. The service door in the back always stuck slightly, just enough to ease open if you knew the right pressure point. I slipped in without a sound. Inside, the lobby lights were dimmed. Security was likely on automated systems now, motion-triggered. But I stayed in the shadows. I wasn't here to stay. I placed the wooden box at the center of the lobby floor, where the morning receptionist would see it the moment she walked in. The box was no bigger than a shoebox, hand-carved walnut. The family crest engraved into the lid, the same crest Seraphine had removed from the new logo 2 years ago, claiming modernity didn't need nostalgia. Inside, I'd left 3 items: the original keycard, mine, worn, still slightly bent from being pressed into my back pocket too often, a folded copy of my untouched patent, and a photograph. It was from the night of our first product launch. Richard, Seraphine, and me, standing on a rooftop, all 3 of us in black, drenched in champagne and ego. Someone had taken it just as we laughed. But on the back, in my handwriting, I'd scrawled a single sentence: I built the doors you walked through. No threat, no ultimatum, just memory. At 3:41 a.m., I shut the door behind me. No one saw me leave. Back home, I made tea and watched the sky begin to pale. At 4:17 a.m., somewhere in that building, an assistant found the box. I imagined her blinking in confusion, maybe even thinking it was a prank, but she'd open it. They always opened the box. By 7 a.m., every board member had seen the PDF, and by 9, Seraphine's phone wouldn't stop ringing. That silence, that long pause before a world collapses, it was the soundless gift I had waited years to give. The rain had barely eased when my phone lit up. No caller ID, just the blank, familiar tension I hadn't felt in years. I answered without a word. Her voice came through, brittle and hushed. I think we need to talk. I paused, then said evenly, I already did. You weren't listening. There was a short silence on the other end, the kind filled with shifting walls and flickering egos. Then she sighed. Come to the boardroom. 1 hour. By the time I got there, the clouds had rolled out, but the air still held that post-storm sharpness, cleansed but unsettled. The private boardroom wasn't as grand as people like to pretend. Polished walnut table, 12 leather chairs, only 2 of which mattered today, hers and mine. Seraphine stood near the window, trying too hard to look effortless. Designer blazer, delicate heels, makeup smoothed on with precision, but she kept glancing toward her phone like it might save her. You blindsided me, she said, not bothering to sit. I did. You erased me, I replied quietly, then pulled out the folder I'd brought in my bag. I didn't throw it down. I didn't raise my voice, just placed it between us like an old family recipe, only this one could undo a decade of her posturing. On top, a certified printout of the original patent filing. Below that, a timeline marked with dates, email screenshots, meeting records, each one placing me in the lab, behind the code, present in the architecture. At the bottom, a clause from our shareholder agreement, Section 4.3, fiduciary breach. She didn't reach for the papers. Instead, her hands tightened around her elbows. This could wreck everything, she whispered. I know. You want a seat at the table now? Is that it? No. I want acknowledgement. And honesty. For once. I watched as her face shifted, twitching between fear and pride like 2 kids tugging opposite ends of a rope. She inhaled through her teeth. I can fix this. I'm not here for repairs, I said. I'm here for clarity. She finally sat. Her fingers tapped the edge of the folder, then stopped. Her eyes didn't meet mine. You could have destroyed me. I still could. She flinched. But you didn't. Why? Because the damage wouldn't stay yours. That line settled between us for a moment too long. By evening, I was back in Somerville, sipping tea in my small kitchen, trying not to check my inbox every minute. The city hummed outside, but inside everything felt still, like the moment just before a crack appears in glass. At 7:23 p.m., I received a summary report from Seraphine's legal team. I didn't have to read past the first paragraph. The original patent was never legally transferred. There it was. In one sentence, a decade of denial unraveled. By 8:06, another email hit my inbox. This one from Everson Capital, the firm backing the lion's share of Seraphine's operations. It was sent to both of us. Short. Brutal. Resolve this within 48 hours, or we walk. That night, the whole building was quiet. Everyone had gone home except for a few cleaning crews and late-night interns burning through ramen and spreadsheets. I passed the reception area quietly, heading toward the elevator, but paused. Down the hall, muffled through the frosted glass, I heard it. Not words, not yelling. A scream, buried in a palm, controlled, contained, desperate. Seraphine. I didn't move. That's the thing about power. It doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it drips in. Quiet, unshakable. And as I turned to leave, I checked my sent mail folder one more time. The investor email, CC'd to one more recipient. Our father. Because if there was one person who taught Seraphine how to pretend, how to polish over the cracks, how to use charm like currency, it was him. But what she never saw coming? That I had learned from him too. And that night, I sent one more email. Not to Seraphine, not to our legal team, but to the one person who always sat behind every curtain, our father. I didn't expect a reply, but at 5:42 p.m., one arrived. If you're in Cape Cod, we can talk. Tonight. Alone. I stared at the screen for a while, heart steady but heavy. Then I packed my coat, printed one final document, and left the hotel. The sun was starting to dip when I pulled into the gravel driveway. The Cape Cod house hadn't changed, gray shingles, white trim, wind chimes tapping against the porch rail, just like the last time I was here, only this time I wasn't a daughter returning home. I was the name on the deed. I didn't knock. I rang the bell, just once. I heard footsteps inside, deliberate, unhurried. When the door creaked open, my father stood there in a navy cardigan, eyes narrowed like I was a solicitor, not his youngest daughter. But he didn't look shocked, just resigned. "Vianney," he said, voice calm. "You came." I stepped inside without waiting for permission. "You invited me." The house still smelled like leather and old paper. We moved into the sitting room, though neither of us sat right away. I placed the manila folder on the table between us, but kept it closed. He folded his hands. "You're angry." "That's not why I'm here." "Then why now?" I didn't blink. "Because your silence has power, and I'm done being quiet." He nodded slowly, as if bracing for the hit. I took a breath. Seraphine erased me from the founder records. She backdated the filings, diverted the IP, and sold a story to investors that I was just a consultant. I didn't say anything, until now. But the investors know. Your board knows. Her attorney knows. I have the paperwork. He was silent. Too silent. "I trusted you," I said quietly. "Even after you said I should stay behind the scenes to protect the brand, even after Seraphine got the media interviews, the awards, the company car." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You don't understand." "No," I interrupted. "I do. That's the problem." His voice dropped low, like he was revealing a corporate strategy, not a betrayal. "Seraphine came to me before the merger, said that if word got out there was another founder, especially one with no business degree, no media profile, there'd be chaos. The board agreed. Investors want simplicity. One face, one story." I stared at him. "And you thought, what? That I'd just stay invisible forever? It wasn't personal, he said. That landed like a slap. I laughed once, hollow. It was only personal. You let your daughter vanish from her own company so the world could digest your version of clean success. He didn't deny it. I pulled the folder open and slid the document toward him. I know whose name is on the original deed for the biotech model, I said. The design, the coded sequence, the structure, not just a draft or an email thread, a notarized file stamped and registered 6 months before the merger, signed by you. His lips parted. I tilted my head. You remember signing it, don't you? He hesitated. Yes, but we never expected it would be needed. It always was, I said. You just didn't want it to be. I tapped the name printed in bold on the bottom line of the deed, Vionette T. Rosemont. The girl no one knew, I echoed bitterly. You thought I'd stay a glorified doorman, but turns out I still hold the keys. His eyes flicked between the paper and me. For the first time in my life, he looked unsure. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. And that silence, it wasn't strength anymore. It was exposure. We stood in that stillness, father and daughter, years of filtered holiday cards, public smiles, private edits to history, and all it took was one sentence, one document, one truth no longer buried. I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. He finally asked, "What do you want, Vionnet?" I met his eyes. Not your approval, not your apology, just the truth to exist. Then I picked up the folder and walked to the door. No dramatic goodbye, no storming out, just the soft click of the latch behind me. I got in the car, turned the ignition, and stared ahead. The phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I didn't need to look. I already knew Seraphine hadn't replied, so I typed, "You have 24 hours before I go public." And I hit send. And when she didn't reply, I made the call myself. It was still dark when I pulled into the underground parking garage. The concrete echoed under my tires. My fingers tapped the steering wheel, not from nerves, but calculation. Above me sat the glass monument I helped design brick by silent brick, year by invisible year. Today, it would reflect something different. The truth. By the time I reached the marble lobby, the security team had formed a wall in front of the elevator. "Ma'am, this area's restricted during the event," one of them said, eyeing my plain black suit and calm face. I didn't respond. I simply nodded toward the woman in heels behind me, my attorney. She stepped forward and handed the head guard a packet. "Federal injunction. She has legal standing to attend and present," she said, clipped and clear. He scanned the document. His brows tightened. "Understood." The group parted, and I walked in like I'd never left, because technically, I never had. The conference room was alive with stage lights, catered breakfast trays, and PR smiles too wide to be real. On the raised platform stood Seraphine. She was in her element, press-ready with a tight bun, a deep green dress, and a grin sharp enough to cut stone. Behind her flashed the company's new partnership logo, projected onto a 10-foot screen. I stayed in the wings as she spoke. "And with this merger," she was saying, "we're not just growing. We're redefining what biotech leadership looks like." Scattered applause. A few camera shutters clicked. The air smelled like lavender and ambition. She was wrapping up her final line when it happened. Not a shout, not a crash, just a shrill, electrical buzz through the microphone. She flinched, looked to the sound tech, and I stepped forward. The spotlight caught me mid-stride. My heels echoed across the hardwood. Somebody gasped. Seraphine's smile froze in place. I reached the center of the stage and took the mic she'd just used. I didn't yell. I didn't gesture. I just said, "Before you applaud a thief, check who owns the patents." The room fell silent. A few hands shot up with phones, live streams blinking to life. I turned slightly so both the audience and the cameras could see the document folder in my hand. 8 years ago, I said, I filed a provisional patent for a neurological interface. It laid the groundwork for what this company built. I registered it under my name and kept the original deed, something none of the people behind me thought to check. Someone in the crowd, an investor I think, stood up. Is this true? I opened the folder and held up the notarized documents, timestamps, signatures, witnessed filings. My voice didn't rise, but my words cut through the air like winter wind. Here's the legal trail, prototype sketches, lab notes, the IP deed, and the licensing terms, including the clause that says this technology can't be sublicensed without my consent. Seraphine stepped forward, mouth twitching. This woman is not part of the board, she said quickly. She's a disgruntled former employee. She's not even listed in our— Because you erased me, I said, meeting her eyes. Deliberately. I turned back to the cameras. I'm not your doorman. I'm your founder. The room reacted like I'd thrown a grenade. Gasps, reporters shouting over one another, flashbulbs popping. Seraphine's face drained of color. You hacked this, she said. You're manipulating documents. You broke into— Enough, said a voice behind her. It was one of the legal officers. Older, conservative suit, white hair. He looked over the documents I handed him, then turned to the crowd. These filings are legitimate. They match our original R&D logs before the rebrand. Seraphine froze. A board member whispered loudly to another, Did you know about this? Another voice. If this goes public— It wasn't a boardroom anymore. It was a battlefield. Except the war had already ended. They just hadn't realized they'd lost. I looked at Seraphine one last time. You didn't just try to erase me. You built your spotlight out of my shadows, and then I left the stage. No applause, no dramatic turn, just silence following me out like a tide receding after a storm. Back in the hallway, my phone buzzed. One missed call. Dad. One voicemail. You need to stop this. You're ruining the family. I listened to that message only once, and then I did something I'd never done before. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. Instead, I let the phone rest face down on the window ledge while I finished folding the quilt that used to sit at the foot of my mother's bed. Vermont mornings are quiet like that. Slow, still, indifferent to the noise of the world unraveling just beyond the hills. The press coverage had slowed to a murmur, but I still checked. Not out of obsession, just curiosity. Like peeking in on an old wound to see how it healed or festered, I opened my laptop with the calm of someone who no longer needed a plan B. Seraphine's face was on the front page of 2 financial news outlets. A grainy photo captured her being ushered out of a black SUV, flanked by federal officers. Her eyes, wide, disbelieving, stared straight into the camera. Former executive under investigation for embezzlement, forgery, and racketeering. I sipped my coffee. It had gone cold. That was the gift. One she never saw coming. Weeks earlier, I'd walked out of the company building without a word. No goodbye to the board, no farewell speech. Just a small, unmarked USB drive placed in a fireproof envelope and slid behind the vault panel where we once stored original patents. On the label, I wrote one word: insurance. It held everything: emails between Seraphine and off-the-book vendors, doctored receipts, fake employees created to reroute funds, years of paper trails she thought were deleted. She was always good at hiding her mess under someone else's rug, but she forgot who wrote the code that tracked it all. I didn't send the files to a journalist. I didn't leak them on social media. That would have given her a chance to spin it. No, I sent them directly to a contact at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, quiet, surgical, untraceable. From a library terminal 3 counties over. 2 weeks after the press conference, agents raided the main office, confiscated every server, froze all executive accounts. Seraphine tried to flee to British Columbia, claimed she was visiting a wellness retreat, but her passport had already been flagged. The fallout was immediate. Suppliers backed out. Investors vanished. Her carefully built house of cards collapsed, and she had no idea I'd pulled the first card before she even picked up the mic. She still blamed me, though. I knew that. The voicemail from Dad made that clear. You need to stop this. You're ruining the family. Funny how that word gets used like a rope, only when it's useful to pull you back in. But I didn't owe her silence or protection, not anymore. Later that day, I took a walk down to the old post office. The clerk handed me a parcel wrapped in plain brown paper. It wasn't a surprise, I'd ordered it myself. Inside was a framed drawing my nephew had made in art class. Stick figures, blue sky, one woman standing tall in front of a building labeled HQ. He'd written in crooked letters, Aunt Vio, the real boss. I placed it on the mantel beside the fireplace, right next to Mom's candle holder. That night, I lit the candle. Not for mourning, but for marking the end of something. A promise kept. I hadn't ruined them. They ruined themselves. When they decided I was expendable. When they erased my name from the documents, from the rooms I'd built with my own hands, from the family photo wall I once hung up every holiday. I didn't fight them with noise. I fought them with facts, with silence, with truth dressed in patience. And truth, when given time, has teeth. The wind outside picked up, rustling the pine trees. The flame flickered. I stared at it for a while. Then I whispered, I'm done. Not bitter, not triumphant, just done. There's a difference between burning bridges and watching them collapse under their own weight. Mine were soaked in gasoline long before I ever struck the match. I turned off the lamp. Let the darkness settle in like an old friend. Somewhere out there, Seraphine was blaming the world, screaming about betrayal, demanding lawyers. Dad was probably pacing in his living room, clutching a tumbler of whatever he drank when reality pressed too close. And me? I was free. Have you ever had to quietly burn down the world someone built around you, just to be free?